Hello everybody, and welcome back once again to Mountain Computers. Today we're starting off looking at the network switch that we were looking at in the last video. You may notice I've got a couple more network connections hooked up to it, one of which is the wireless access point that we were looking at 2 videos ago. I've got that somewhat pre-configured, but that's not really the focus of today's video. We'll go over that in a future video, but today's focus is on one of the other extra connections that I've got running over to here. Now, those of you who have watched a few of my other videos may recognize these systems. These are the Dell Optiplex, I think 5040s that I had in the video where I was repairing the CPU socket on one of them, and I've actually gone ahead and replaced the motherboard in the other one, and it seems to be working fine now. So I figured today we'll go ahead and we will install Arch Linux onto one of these, the top one which is running here, in order to act as a management workstation of sorts for this little mini network that we're putting together over here for the channel. Now I've got some display capture hardware hooked up to this machine here, and I'm capturing that on my little Chromebook laptop that actually also has Arch installed on it back over here. So why don't we go ahead and switch over to display capture now. Okay, so I figured it would be as good a place as any to get started here in the system BIOS. Since we're going to be configuring this machine from scratch, it makes sense to start with making sure that the underlying system is configured well to be able to handle the sorts of workloads that we're going to be putting on it. So, that said, I guess this is an Optiplex 3040, not a 3050, but beyond that, if we start poking around here, you can get into this menu by hitting F2 when the system starts up. We can see that we have 16 gigabytes of DDR3 memory, that's 2 8-gig sticks, and a Core i5 6500 processor that has 4 CPU cores. It is not hyper-threaded, so it's an HT-capable flag here is set to no. You can see the clock speeds here and such, and also you can see the drive that I've got plugged into the first SATA port here. We've got Intel integrated graphics, and we've got an audio controller. If we start looking in the boot sequence here, for the purposes of what we're doing right now, we'll actually want to swap these around to put this SanDisk at the top, because that's our boot drive that has Arch Linux on it for doing the install. I don't think I need to save a custom user setting here, and then we'll keep moving on. If we look at advanced boot options, our options here are for legacy option ROMs. I don't think we'll actually need those in this case. Next, we've got UEFI boot path security. There are many options in here which we will probably not touch. The defaults are okay for most circumstances, unless you are in a highly controlled environment where you have a lot of users coming through. And by highly controlled, I mean more so that you don't have control over what users are trying to do on your network. So your systems need to be highly controlled. If we take a look at what the date and time are, I believe that this is pretty close. I think it's a day ahead. It might be set to UTC, I'm not sure, but I'm going to set it to Mountain Time for right now, which currently is the 18th, and the hour is 19, and then the minutes look like they were probably pretty much right on, so that's good. We'll move on from general here into system configuration. If I can manage to move my mouse around, I'm on a pretty smooth surface here, not the best for tracking a mouse's movement. Our integrated NIC will not be booting with Pixie, so we will just set this to enabled so that we're not trying to network boot this whole time. Serial port wise, we won't really be using any serial ports. I'm not even sure that the machine really has one built into hardware here. I don't see one, so I'm not sure where this is being connected unless it's internally. We may as well disable it. Sometimes doing these things can help you with your boot up times. SATA drives, we will leave in AHCI mode. That'll be the best for making sure that our disk is actually detected and working. Disabled, of course, would leave us unable to use any disks, which wouldn't be any good. Usually there's a RAID option here, but I guess that isn't present in this particular BIOS. We've got 2 drives here. If we were trying to do some very particular mitigations, we could turn off this other SATA disk port here, but I don't really think that that's important in our circumstances. I am going to enable smart reporting. That will help us to detect if our drive is ever having problems or going bad. USB, again, I'm not too worried about the enabled or disabled state of these. Just being able to plug things in whenever I feel like it is fine for my particular environment here. Again, audio is going to be fine, and media card being enabled is going to be fine. So, with that said, let's go ahead and turn the system off, and we will start booting up our Arch Linux bootable media. Okay, so trying to boot that seems to have yielded a problem with the secure boot compatibility of our Arch Linux ISO, which tells me that we need to at least temporarily disable secure boot in our BIOS. So let's go ahead and go back in there real quick. So we will go down to, I think it is under secure boot. We'll just temporarily disable secure boot, and we'll apply that setting. And we'll give the Arch Linux boot up another shot here. And that apparently has done it in a rather Mario-like fashion. I'm confused and surprised as to why that was the coin sound, but is that normal for Arch Linux and I just don't usually have a PC speaker? Maybe someone can tell me in the comments. So anyway, let's see. I don't need the screen recorder for our Arch install today, so we'll just go ahead and select the regular install option here. I believe that DHCP should get us network connectivity hooked up over the wired LAN port pretty easily here too, so we should have no problems, I think, getting going with an Arch install very quickly once the system's booted up here. So here we are at the prompt, and if I run an IPA, we do have an IP address assigned to us here, and if we were to try to ping google.com, the ever so ubiquitous option for checking to see if you have internet connectivity, it looks like our connection there is fine. So I believe the name of the package to run, or at least the executable, is just Arch install with no hyphen, but I could be wrong. Nope, it does appear that that is correct. We're checking for mirrors, and we'll get the install underway here in no time. Our install language and our keyboard layout being English and US is going to be fine. It looks like we're getting some extra parts of the boot up coming through there. That's interesting. Our mirror region, I think I can set to the United States, and it does appear to be the case that that would be an option. So we'll go ahead and... Did I not select that? Let's give that another shot. I tried hitting spacebar to select it, and it was not having it. So there we go. I just had to hit enter. I don't do these Arch installs all the time, so I don't remember what the appropriate options are for selecting things all the time, but locale language, ENUS, is good. UTF-8 character encoding is fine. Let's start configuring drives. So we have our 128 gigabyte SATA SSD here, so we'll tell it to use that disk, and then we'll select a disk layout where we wipe all selected drives and use the best effort default partition layout. That'll be fine for me. ButterFS is also fine. Normally I usually go with ext4, but I think I've tried ButterFS a couple times and been relatively happy with it recently. Using subvolumes is fine, and compression is also going to be fine. So, an encryption password, I don't think I'll be doing drive level encryption on this drive necessarily today, but again, in certain environments that may be a requirement for your particular use case. It's especially handy for laptops where you're going to have a system out and about, and someone, an attacker, may be able to steal the drive out of the machine and try and plug it in somewhere else and boot up and get into your system files. They won't be able to do that, basically, at all if your drive is already encrypted, unless they can somehow bypass the encryption, which is going to require significant effort, essentially. Systemd is a contentious bootloader option for many, but I think that we will go ahead and we will use it. Would you like to use grub as a bootloader instead of systemd boot? We'll say no, but I use grub on plenty of other systems too, so I don't know. It's neither here nor there in this particular case. Swap being on with 16 gigs of memory is probably fine. So we will go ahead and do some swap. We'll pick a different host name for this. Let's go with MTCMPWKS001. That will be fine. For Mountain Computers Workstation 1. We will need to set a complicated root password. And it seems like that is weak, and it gives us the option to use a different password, but we will just go ahead and keep using it anyways. Again, I'm not too worried about the particular security stature of, or is that the right word? I believe so, of this system. And one more time for verification. Easy enough. Now we want to create a user account, so let's enter a username here of mtcmp admin, and then we need to enter a password for mtcmp admin. We will bypass that option again, and should this user be a super user, we'll say yes, because this is an admin user. And then we will confirm and exit with our changes. It occurs to me that you can leave the root password blank to disable the root account, which is generally, for security purposes, actually an easy to do and good to do sort of thing. So why don't we make a modification to my previous entry there, and we'll just rely on the user account here and disable the root one. For profile, we're going to do a desktop install on this system. You could use Arch as a server, or a minimal distribution where you would install other packages for yourself, but in this case, being a desktop system will make some sense as a general administration workstation, so we'll go with that option. Desktop environment options are always contentious, but I've lately been kind of swaying towards liking GNOME quite a bit, so we'll go with that option. We'll go with the Intel open source graphics drivers because we're using an Intel integrated graphics device for this particular system. For audio, we will use Pipewire. For additional packages, I don't think we'll install any at this particular moment. For the network, we'll go ahead and use Network Manager, which is required for working with GNOME. For time zone, we will adjust to my local time zone here, which is America, Denver. And then automatic NTP time syncing will be fine. Optional repositories, I don't think we'll need anything out of these in this particular case, so we'll go ahead and we will pick the install option, and from here, everything for Arch should start downloading updated packages and installing components of the system. Alright, and now that that is finished, we should have all of the base default packages for a GNOME install of Arch on our system now, and it's asking us if we'd like to change root into that environment so that we could do some post-installation configuration, but I think what we'll go ahead and do is just say no, and then we will, at a hardware level, restart the system here, and just go ahead and let it boot back up into our new install. And I should be able to show off a running, hopefully, installation of Arch Linux here. So there we go. We're booting up, and in almost no time flat, we're at a login prompt here. So I can go ahead and sign in there using our strong and complicated password. And here we go. Here's a default installation of GNOME with all of the things that you would probably expect out of GNOME running on Arch. So I think we'll go ahead and do some extra configuration here though. So one of the things that's really nice on Arch is being able to install an AUR helper. So I don't know whether the GNOME web browser here lets you just do a search, but it looks like it does. And there's, if you're not familiar with these, they are Arch user repository package managers, essentially, that will help you to manage packages that are distributed through the Arch user repository. So where if we wanted to install something from the regular official repositories here, we could do sudo pacman-s and then grab, say, neofetch, and then put in our password here to authenticate. You cannot do that for items in the Arch user repository. So while we do have neofetch here now, amazing. What we could not do is necessarily install things from the AUR without going through multiple commands to bring down the repository and by cloning it through git and then running the install scripts by hand. So instead what this does is it helps us out with that quite a bit. The one that I prefer and the one that I've seen a lot of people using mostly is called Yay. And installation of Yay is not particularly complicated, so we'll just go through and we'll follow someone else's guide here. Thank you to whomever has written the guide, which I wound up following here. But we'll go ahead and grab who make use of. Thank you, Depesh Sharma, for your contributions to the body of knowledge on how to work with Arch Linux here. So it says that we will need to go ahead and install some base development packages and Git, which makes sense because those are packages that you need to be able to do a Git clone for the AUR's entry for Yay, because it is itself distributed through the AUR. So let's go ahead and make a directory for source files here. We'll change directory into it, and then we will git clone https://aur.archlinux.org/yay.git. And then that should go ahead and get us a folder called Yay, it looks like. So we can cd into that, and then we can run make package-si, and that should go ahead and work through the Yay installation for us. And then we'll tell it we're okay with proceeding with the installation. It looks like we should be good there, and then we should be able to run commands with Yay now. So is there a -- version here? I think it told us what it was, but yes, here we go. We've got a version tag here, and now one thing that you tend to wind up doing is installing a graphical package manager, and Yay happens to give us access to one that I like quite a bit, which is the PAMAC AUR variant. There's a couple other different distributions of PAMAC that you can get, but I don't tend to use Flatpak or Snap packages, and I haven't had much luck with installing those particular distributions of PAMAC lately anyways. So it's asking us what TTF fonts we would like. I think we're going to go with Noto fonts, which I believe is at least partially contributed to by Google. I might be wrong on that, but regardless, now we want to remove make dependencies after the install. I don't think we'll need to hold on to them much. It will, once we have a graphical package manager, it will do most of the management of those dependencies for us. So we'll offer no diffs to show because I don't care much in this particular circumstance, although if you care a lot about your version management of software, you probably should inspect those every time, and then we'll go ahead and we'll proceed with installation. And as that continues to work its way through, we will eventually be left with a new desktop file option in our menu. Then we should be able to go into our menu here and find this new Add Remove Software button, which we can select to open up our installation of PAMAC. You can get updates that are available for the system. We've just done a fresh install, so there really aren't any. You can manage your already installed packages through here, and you can also look at and go ahead and initiate a download and install of other packages as well. So, some time has passed since I recorded that last clip, so for better or for worse, you might notice that my terminal output is empty here, but given that, I can actually now demonstrate that if we go into the updates section here, that there actually are some updates that we could apply. So if we put in our elevated password here, then we can accept that we want to install Highway, which I guess is a new dependency for one of the packages that we are getting here. We just hit apply, and then the tool will start going through and gathering all of the packages that we want to update and installing them. which is fantastic. I guess it's also worth noting, something I overlooked in the last clip, is that there is actually another graphical package manager installed by default on GNOME variants of Arch, and that's their GNOME software manager here. I'm just not that big of a fan of this particular software manager. If I remember correctly, I don't think it has any support for the AUR, although this software repositories thing might let you add it somehow. Maybe that's what this community section is here, but regardless, it's very close to PAMAC, but not quite the same, and PAMAC itself is a little bit more universal in terms of its compatibility with other desktop environments in Arch, so I tend to just kind of go for it instead, even though I usually, more or less, tend to use GNOME these days. It works well on XFCE, though, too, and I've historically used that as well, so that's sort of where my preference for PAMAC is coming from, I suppose. But that also said, we have a bunch of extra software on here that I think we won't really have much use for. So although it tends to be a bit of a pain uninstalling default software in GNOME, I think we're going to endeavor to try to get rid of some of it anyways. Things like cheese and boxes aren't really going to be that useful for us. Maps and clocks are going to be completely useless in our circumstance because I'm not going to be navigating around on my, network management workstation, and I'm not really going to care that much about the time other than the current time. I have other computers for that particular role. Cheese is a software package for working with webcams. There is no webcam hooked up to the system, and Boxes is a virtualization management application for GNOME that is a relatively nice and simplified view for doing virtualization within GNOME, but we're not going to be doing virtualization on this system. We're going to more or less farm that out as a role to some other computers that we're going to connect to. So there's some other pieces of software in here that we really don't need, but in order to look at getting rid of them, our real best chance at doing that is just going to be to come in here and start unchecking boxes on things that we're not going to need. So I don't think that we're going to need boxes or books. The calendar would be relatively useless. I don't remember whether it's one that's particularly easy to get rid of. Oftentimes these built-in packages have a lot of dependent software that, while you do want to get rid of, you have to also manually define as being something that you don't care about and will therefore want to get rid of. So let me kind of go through here and find all of these packages that we don't care about and work through all of the weird side dependencies for things as well to try and get rid of just the things that we don't care about and that don't wind up incurring also deltas on things that we do want to keep. And that will take me a minute, so I'll be right back. You'll see probably a little time lapse here. Okay, so here is where we're seeing some of those dependency requirements come in, saying that could not satisfy dependencies. When you remove GNOME software, that breaks the dependency for another package called the GNOME software package kit plugin. So we would have to also get rid of this package in order for us to get rid of GNOME software. So essentially what we need to do now is search for that package and tell the system that we also want to get rid of that. And the same will go for GNOME user docs and Sushi. And now that we have those selected to be removed, we'll hit apply again, and it looks like we'll actually get off pretty easy this time around. I've had times where I try to uninstall some of the built-in software and wind up going through several rounds of contingent dependencies as I start to remove them. So we will put in our password here. We see that there are actually still some warnings here, but I think that we can pretty safely ignore these as optional dependencies that don't necessarily need to be removed from the system. And from there, we can take a look in our menu again, and we can see that a decent amount of the software that was installed by default is now gone. And therefore is a little bit decluttered from our menu system since we're not going to use it. From here, we'll go ahead and we'll start looking at installing some new packages for things that I do want to go ahead and use. So let's take a look at my list, which I've prepared here ahead of time. I've got the Cora icon pack, and we're not going to be able to search for that here, actually. This is the installed section, so we're going to have to go over to Browse, where we can grab new software. So we'll search for Cora. Oh, yes, I have not actually configured the support for the AUR inside of PAMAC yet. So this is something that you have to do if you want to be able to actually install PAMAC packages, AUR packages with PAMAC. and that is to go to the third-party section here and actually enable AUR support. So even though this is the AUR variant of PAMAC, it's not turned on by default. So we'll turn on enable AUR support in here, and we will check the thing for checking for updated packages. That way, when we select the update area here, we'll actually get notifications for and listings within the update menu for items that we did install through the AUR. So we've got that. As far as other preferences go in here, I'm actually going to enable downgrade, which can be useful in certain scenarios. And also, we will look through here just to make sure that there aren't any other pieces that we want to change. Every 6 hours for me tends to be a little bit overkill. I'm not usually sitting at a machine every 6 hours anyways, so I tend to change the frequency of that update checker to every day. Automatically downloading updates is something that I am usually fine with. It takes up a little bit more disk space, but since I'm going to run the updates eventually anyways, it isn't really a problem for me usually. Hiding the tray icon when there's no update is also fine. We don't have a system tray installed at this point, but eventually we will. 4 parallel downloads is fine, and the caching options here that are default I think are also mostly fine. So, back to Cora. If we go ahead and have a look here, Cora icon theme is the one that I'm after. That's just a icon theme that I like, that looks fairly nice in my opinion. Also, another graphical thing is posy cursors. That'll change our default cursor here. And GNOME Themes Extra will allow us to take our GTK3 applications and give them a dark mode option, which isn't installed out of the box. Only a dark mode for GTK4 apps is. Also, a Chromium-based browser is probably preferable for working with a lot of web applications these days, since, for better or for worse, a lot of web apps are written to comply with Chromium as their default, and then other web browsers sort of have to try to meet feature parity with it. I'm going to see if I can find the de-googled Chromium option in here somewhere. I know that it's an option in the AUR, but I don't remember if my recollection of the name de-googled is necessarily accurate. It must not be. So maybe what we'll wind up doing is just installing the base Chromium package here. Let me see if I can find the other option. Ah, here we go. Okay, it's called ungoogled Chromium. We'll go for the build package for now, but we may have to switch over to the binary precompiled version if I have some problems with the compilation. We will see. Also of interest to us is Extension Manager, another package through the AUR that lets us easily install GNOME extensions, which is something I'm going to do because I sort of more or less dislike the basic workflow for working in GNOME, and I go for something a little bit modified. We'll also want Libre menu, if I can manage to spell it. There we go. I believe this is the correct package. And also the version of the GNOME terminal with transparency right here. And also the open source version of VS Code, otherwise known as Code OSS. And also Variety, if I can spell it correctly, which is a wallpaper changer. So we'll go ahead and work through the installs of that software right now, and then following the install, we will, if I can type my password correctly, go ahead and work through configuring the software that we have installed. So while that goes ahead and installs, maybe I will take a brief second to talk through why we are using GNOME here and why we're using Arch, especially for a management workstation on a somewhat theoretically controlled environment. And the really truthful answer here is that, for one thing, I don't care, in this case, too much about software version control just because of the particular environment that I'm in, but in particularly controlled environments, it's often preferred to have some highly inspected software, making sure that the versions that you're installing for each package have been thoroughly inspected by someone. And so in those sorts of environments where they're looking to minimize
potential attack surfaces for the software that they're using, it's typical to install something a little bit more stable, like a Debian-based system, or perhaps something more in the Red Hat realm of software, like Red Hat Enterprise Linux, or formerly CentOS, may it rest in peace. In the circumstances that we're in here, though, really, I don't care too much about having the bleeding edge software. I would actually maybe prefer having some of the newer features in this particular case. So that is what I'm using. And as far as using GNOME goes, GNOME is just something that I have grown a little bit familiar with, if you feel differently, and would prefer a different desktop environment, then every single Linux user, I think, would probably have to agree that while they have their own preferences, Linux offers you many, many ways to do things, sometimes to its detriment, but also, in the opinion of many Linux users, to its benefit, because it offers so many options and so many potential ways of doing things that, depending on your preferences for workflow, there's almost always a solution out there for you. It occurs to me, too, that it might be worth talking a little bit more while this goes through about the Arch user repository. It is, I think I glossed over a little bit earlier, a repository of software set up by, the name would sort of imply, Arch users as opposed to the official Arch repository maintainers, in order to offer a variety of extra software for use on Arch-based systems. Oftentimes, the software is distributed as source code that is compiled on your system as it's being installed in a manner somewhat, I guess, similar to something like Gentoo software would be, although by and large a majority of the software that you run on Arch systems usually is precompiled, and it is also often the case that you're able to find a variant, especially for very popular software on the Arch user repository, you're able to find a variant of the package that is precompiled, like the ungoogled Chromium that we were looking at earlier. There was a precompiled binary available, but scrolling by on the screen here, you can actually see the compilation happening in real time for ungoogled Chromium. Since we are building it from source, there are some advantages and some disadvantages to building software right on your system. If you take the time to optimize your build parameters, then oftentimes you can wind up with a piece of software that actually runs a little bit faster on your particular hardware, but it's almost always at the cost of taking much, much longer to install because of the build process, especially if you don't have a system with very, very fast processing cores that can chew through the build process in a really timely manner. But given the Arch user repository's extremely, extremely wide breadth of available software, using Arch can tend to be a pretty appealing prospect for new users of Linux-based systems, simply because it is often very easy to find the software that you're looking for, but also, especially on Arch-based systems, there is certainly a learning curve with figuring out how certain aspects of Linux will work, and using something like GNOME makes that a lot easier, but there are also certainly aspects of Arch that are still not easy, so enter at your own risk, but potentially bask in the glory, so to speak, of the Arch user repository if you do decide to go with an Arch-based system. Alright, you know what? I have changed my mind on whether we are going to use the binary version of this package or the compiled version. We've just about hit 1/10 of the way through here, and it's probably been 8 minutes or so. So it's going to take quite a long time to build up ungoogled Chromium here, I think. So we're going to cancel this. We've got 6 pending operations still, as far as software installs go. I think we made it through a pretty good amount of the software. I'm not sure, though, but we're going to swap over midway here between the ungoogled Chromium versions here. We are going to instead ask it to install the binary repository. There's actually a Wayland version here too, which confuses me, but with ozone patches for Wayland, that might also be a good way to go if they had a binary, since we are running the Wayland display server, but there does not appear to be a precompiled binary, so we're going to hope that we can go ahead and get the regular binary to work here, and I'm going to uncheck the version for compilation, and we'll see if that gets us through. It looks like these packages were not yet installed, so we'll go ahead and we'll kick that back off again, and hopefully this time we'll be off to the races in a little bit shorter manner. Okay, that went much, much faster, which is excellent for what we're doing here. So, given that fact, we can move on to our next steps, which is to go ahead and start configuring the system with some of the software that we just set up. So why don't we start with some of the easy UI stuff, and that's going to require us to open up GNOME tweaks here. We'll go to Appearance, and we will swap our cursors for Posy White, and you can see that basically immediately took effect, which is great. Now we have these new cursors. Our icons we can change to Cora, and that will change around the icons that we get in our menu system here, and in a few other places around the system, so that's also nice. For legacy applications, we can now go ahead and select Advaita Dark. That's going to be made possible by the GNOME Themes Extra package. This is not installed by default for some reason, so you can see that adjusts our terminal to dark mode, which is great. We'll talk about backgrounds in a few minutes, but otherwise, I think that covers the things that we were going to adjust in Appearance. So next, let's go to the top bar adjustment. That's going to adjust this clock. I think that that's actually fairly good. If I remember right, though, there should be a way to adjust the time to display in 12-hour mode instead of 24-hour mode. That must not be in GNOME Tweaks, but instead in the regular settings menu, so we'll move on to window title bars. Here, let's actually activate minimize and maximize options, which gets us a little bit closer to a Windows-like feeling. If we wanted to, we could actually place those on the left side for a more Mac-like feeling, I guess, but I'm more of a historically Windows user, so this agrees a little bit better with my my traditional instincts for using software. So I think that covers pretty much everything that I was going to talk about. Oh, and let's also disable attaching modal dialogues. That's the pop-up windows that come up over software. You may have noticed earlier when I had the settings menu open for PAMAC that, if I can find it, because we have a new icon for it. Here it is. And you can see that this is in dark mode now as well because it's a GTK3 application, not GTK4. That if I open up this preferences menu here, which will require me to elevate, that if we try to move the pop-up window around, it actually moves the entire window with it. Disabling this option will make those windows operate independent of each other so that the pop-up window could be readjusted separately in case you're trying to have some other software behind that you're trying to reference alongside this pop-up, but the background window keeps getting in the way. This helps a lot with that, so I tend to disable the attach modal dialogues option here. So let's talk about why this window is not in dark mode now, though, even though we changed the appearance over to the dark mode one here. And that is because this is a GTK4 application. So the way to change that is not going to be inside of this, but instead over here in the regular settings menu. Should they just take all of these tweaks settings and put them into the regular settings menu? Probably, but that's not the way they've done it right now. So if we go to Appearance, though, we should be able to swap over to Dark Mode. Notice that with the latest versions of GNOME, you actually have the ability to set a light mode with a corresponding dark mode wallpaper, and those wallpapers basically are tied to each other so that if you switch to one, the wallpaper that appears will depend on whether you're in light mode or dark mode. But now, our other applications here are set up so that they run in dark mode, and that's pretty great, in my opinion at least, because I like dark mode. And then the other thing that we wanted to change in here was, for one, I don't necessarily care much for hot corners. There's a way to disable them from here, but I don't ever remember how to do it because the search for hot corner does not work. Okay, it's in multitasking. From here we can turn off hot corner, and that will disable the little feature that lets you move your cursor into the upper left to open the menu. Now we have to hit activities for that to come up. Normally, if you're using the regular GNOME workflow, that's not great, but we'll be replacing the activities view here with something a little bit more Windows-like later. So the other thing that I wanted to change in here was the date and time options for showing the time up here, and that was to change this into an ANPM format, which is just more or less a United States Convention for Time Representation. So that'll show us that it's 3 p.m. instead of 1500 hours, basically, which is easier for me to correlate at a glance. With that said, we've adjusted a lot of UI options now, so I think it's time for us to move into some more UX-centric adjustments. For that, we're going to open up the extension manager here. There are a lot of built-in extensions shipped with GNOME when you install it on a system with Arch, but some of the ones that I'm going to be after are ones that we'll have to install manually. So starting, let's grab Arc Menu. We'll grab this version because this older version is not supported, and we'll go ahead and let that get installed. From there, you see we have a new icon in the upper left here, but we're going to bring that even further by also grabbing Dash to Panel, if I can type it correctly. There we go. And we'll also grab Material U Color Theming, and App Indicator, and K-Status Notifier Support, and the Tiling Assistant, as well as the default search option here, which I'm not sure will make a great difference to our UX necessarily, but maybe to a couple places in the UI with Blur My Shell. And with those pieces of software installed, you can see they're all enabled here, and as we were going, you probably noticed there's been quite a significant change to the way that we'll interact with our system now. Instead of having a top bar, we now have a bottom bar with our pinned applications always showing up here in a very Windows-like fashion. I did say that we were going to make the system a little bit closer to Windows, but we still have a little bit more configuration to go through. For one thing, I am not much of a fan of this application picker, and that's why we have Arc Menu. But the default Arc Menu settings are not necessarily ones that I'm a fan of either, so we're going to go through and make a couple changes to some of the software here. So let's go ahead and open up Dash to Panel settings, and one thing that I always tend to do is take the taskbar and monitor center it, and take my left box, which contains this Arc Menu here, and I will also monitor center it, and that gets us a somewhat Windows 11-y style centered layout on our taskbar, or our panel as it were here. And then I also will usually not show this application button because we have Arc Menu installed instead. I also usually actually do show the Activities button, and I will almost always put it between the Arc Menu button and my other icons here. And let's change that to Monitor Center so that we get a little bit more predictable behavior for how the layout goes here, instead of having this centered over here. And you may notice that the Activities button actually isn't showing right now. We both have to turn it on in here as well as in Arc Menu, if I remember right. It's settings, which isn't that intuitive. But one other thing that I tend to do is I'll take the Date menu here and I'll actually throw it onto the left side, which is a little bit different from how Windows does it, but is something that I've found that I kind of like because it shows my notifications and things in a nice way on the left side here. And then I have another menu over here for things like system settings. Let's take a look at the style options now. So one thing I tend to like a little bit is having a completely transparent taskbar, which is basically the opposite of what we have here. So I'm going to override panel theme opacity, and I will bring that all the way down to 0. Now you may notice that this doesn't look transparent. It looks translucent, and that is being accomplished by Blur My Shell, which is taking everything underneath of our panel here and it is blurring it. We'll fix that in the Blur My Shell options in a little bit. Also, I tend to go for the Coloria. indicators for what applications are open. I'm not sure why I necessarily like them over Metro, because they're very similar, but I don't know, it's just a very tiny touch that I tend to prefer. There's some other options in here that I also tend to change, but for brevity's sake, let's go ahead and not talk about them much, and we'll just move on to configuring Arc Menu instead. So, looking at Arc Menu here, there are a lot of options, and the Arc Menu settings tend to wind up destroying themselves very often, I've found, when the window's open, but we'll work through that. So, let's see. Our menu hotkey, let's set to left super, which would, on a Windows-style keyboard, make it so that pressing the Windows key will bring up our Arc Menu here. Now let's also change layouts. So right now we have the default Arc Menu layout, but one of the layouts that I tend to like going for is the Redmond-style one, because it will, when you apply it, which you have to do up here, there we go, let you get a full application list rather than needing to go into the applications menu to get there necessarily. I also tend to like taking the search bar and putting it at the bottom so that we get this kind of a layout. I also tend to like making this a little bit taller, but again, for brevity's sake, we won't go through that. However, one thing that I will do is try and go to the button settings here and change this icon, because I don't care too much for the default one. We will browse for icons, and let's go for the distro icons set. We'll find the Arch version, and then we'll also just make it a little bit larger so that it matches the sizing on the other icons better. And then the last thing that we want to do is turn on that activities menu, and that's here. There we go. So now we can get the activities view from here, but we also have our new menu, and everything should be pretty much set up there. If we go into the Blur My Shell settings, which should open, but seem to not want to, let's try re-enabling this. I have had many problems lately with the extension manager getting very buggy, and it has been a pain, unfortunately, even though it is a very convenient piece of software. Let's see if we can manage to get this opened up here. There we go. So on the panel, we will want to turn off panel blurring. That will get us a completely transparent taskbar here, which is, in my opinion, rather nice. And then we will leave Material U color theming in its default. That seems fine with me, because when it's working, it's very nice, and it will give you a look on some of the applications that matches your wallpaper. I've found that it only works with GTK4 applications very consistently, and even then, usually when the wallpaper changes, have to relog on the system, so it's very hit and miss. Its integration with Variety Wallpaper Changer is not very great, but maybe that will change in the future. It'd be nice to see that. But once in a while, it gets it right, and when it does, it looks very good. So I keep it on my systems, at least. And then let's take a look at the Tiling Assistant. This is a application that makes it so that you can press your super key and then a button on your number pad on the edges of the numbers, say 1, 4, 7, 8, 9, 6, 3, or 2, and it will put your application over on one side. Now, one problem with a lot of tiling assistants or tiling window managers in general is that they will ask you about what application you're trying to put on the other side of your tiling before it will let you continue using your software. So in order to combat that problem, we will ask it not to bring up the tiling pop-up, and once we've done that, then if I try and tile this, you'll notice that that menu won't come up, and we'll be able to continue working without it. For the sake of aesthetic, we'll probably also want to set up some window gaps. I usually go for a 12-point window gap here on all sides of all windows, and I do also enable the gap on maximized windows so that if you open up a window like this, it still has gaps. Normally, I probably wouldn't go for that, but on systems where I hide this panel from dash to panel, I find that the panel doesn't want to stay open when you have a maximized application, and actually by using Tiling Assistant, you can manage to avoid that if your maximized windows don't actually take up the bottom edge of the screen, so you can wind up getting around a bug of sorts there by just having it set so that your maximized windows don't take up the bottom part of the screen, and then your your panel down here will wind up working more correctly when you're auto-hiding it. I'm not going to do that on this particular system, but by convention, I'll wind up setting it in the same way. I think that the default key bindings are pretty much fine, and I don't really care about switching anything else with this, so I think that that will more or less have us done configuring extensions. Now, these applications are probably not really what I care about. Nautilus, the default file manager, is fine, but music is not something I'm going to be using very often, so instead let's go ahead and pin ungoogled Chromium to the dash. We can just click and drag to reassign the order of these. And then as far as other applications that I'll be opening up regularly, I'm not sure that there really are any. Why don't we go ahead and pin the code editor here too. Yeah, that'll be fine. And then there are still some pieces of software which I'm never going to really open up in here, but which I don't want uninstalled from the system for the sake of their dependency for other applications. So why don't we talk about how we can go ahead and get rid of those entries from here, and that's going to be using Menu Libre, which I must have installed the wrong version of or did not grab. So let's go back to our very nice looking now package manager, and let's take a look at Menu Libre. Or I think I called it Libre Menu before, and that's probably the issue. Yes, the actual title is Menu Libre. There we go. I'm not sure what that other package was, so that's unfortunate. Whatever that was, we'll get rid of it, and we'll go ahead and install this one. Hopefully the other one was not malicious. And with that installed, now we should have an option here to open up Menu Editor, which is Menu Libre, and from inside of this application, we can look at the .desktop files on our system, which correspond to each one of these entries, and we can hide some of the pieces of software that we don't really care about. Say, Avahi, which I'm not really probably ever going to open up. I think that those are under, I don't remember, at least some of them are under Internet here. So we can click on this option, and then we can hide from menus, and then hit save up here, and now that we've done that, Avahi SSH server is hidden from our menus. So let me go ahead and do that for some of the other pieces of software that I don't think we'll be opening on a very common basis, or that we would necessarily otherwise be opening from our terminal. Okay, and with that, I think we should be pretty slimmed down here on what software is going to wind up showing up in our menus here. So, with that, I think we will end with one last thing that some people may be interested in, and that is why I don't have the terminal down here, and that's not for any particular reason other than that I wanted to address it last. So we'll pin that into our dash as well. This is, unfortunately, in some cases, sort of the core of using a Linux system. For better or for worse, your terminal is something that on a Linux system you should probably at least pay a little bit of attention to configuring in a way that you like using, because for certain pieces of software you're just not going to have another option other than to use a TUI or a TTY user interface application for. So we'll go ahead and open up the preferences, and as I somewhat alluded to earlier, by installing the variant of this application that supports transparency, we'll go ahead and come into colors, and we will set the transparency so that we get a little bit of a see-through version of the application here. Well, I decided I just couldn't leave the video well enough alone, and I went ahead and used the Creative Commons to find us some cyberpunk wallpapers here. So I've gone ahead and downloaded those. They're not the highest quality images, but it's what you're going to get out of the Creative Commons, I guess, unfortunately. But that's going to be something that's easy for us to use in the video here. So I've also done a regrettable thing in Linux standards, and I've gone ahead and opened up a Nautilus session here as root, specifically because my user does not have access to the user share backgrounds folder that Variety defaults to for its wallpaper locations. And what we're going to go ahead and do now that we have this opened up like this is drag our wallpapers on over to here, and that will get them all over there. We don't really need them here anymore, and I also don't necessarily need the GNOME default ones here. They'll interfere with Variety's default gathering scheme, so we'll go ahead and close out of all of this. And now if we open up Variety and accept the end user license agreement and do not allow internet access because it's really not required for what we're going to be using it for, accept and continue, then we can disable these internet-based options. We can set the change wallpaper on start to be enabled, and then we can adjust this. I usually go for 30 minutes on my wallpapers, cycling, because any more often than that just kind of gets excessive in my opinion. But now, since we have this user share backgrounds option enabled, if we come down here to variety and hit next, we should get some wallpaper options. It would be nice if we were to go through and sort of adjust the brightness levels of the images at the bottom and top, and I may do that off camera or something, or off recording anyways, but that more or less gets us going with some cyberpunk-esque wallpapers now too. Very Linux custom rice-y sort of aesthetic, although I gotta say that the open source versions here, or the Creative Commons ones, aren't quite doing it for me. Maybe I'll see what else we can get, but it's something for now. All right, I'll actually leave the video alone here now. So back to the video sign off. So with that, I think we will wrap up this video, which has probably been long enough on its own. And in the next video, we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at the configuration of that Netgear wireless access point. So thank you everyone for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, maybe consider hitting that like button. If you want to follow along with the series, consider subscribing, and I will catch everyone in the next video.